heard about it as a low-level issue, increasing in prominence before I arrived, but really I think last year was really the wake-up call that this was getting out of hand. 2017 we'd started looking at the crop and looking at incidence, diversity, and what was going on, to start to get some research projects going. But it wasn't until last year we thought, this is blowing up, this is spreading it's more abundant and spreading far faster than we would have expected. So that's when by the end of last year I was really starting to worry, this is an epidemic, we need to really get started on doing something about it.
Craig Harris, and we're here in Moxie. This is Harris Farms.
I'm Dan Griffith. I'm one of the tree fruit consultants with GS Long Yakima.
And we're standing here at Orchards in Moxie, and this is old Skeena block that's now been removed due to Western X, and behind us is a Bing block that's also been taking trees out and is on the verge of being removed as well, just from the Western X taking over.
This block here, which was Skeena's, was a really high dollar block. It's one of the most profitable varieties to cherry growers today. And it's a sizable block, and it was lost. And then the block behind us probably will be lost, which is a Bing block. And they were both Western X. Western X is actually a bacterium without a cell wall. We tend to call it a virus, but it's the majority so-called virus in Greater Yakima Valley and Columbia Basin.
With the Western X, as soon as you cut the tree down, we put Roundup on it. This block, since we removed it completely, we sprayed Roundup on everything before we pulled the trees. Pulled it, we're letting it sit a year, and any suckers that come up, spray those with Roundup to make sure there's no live tissue, and then we'll rip it, fumigate it, and do all that before we replant it. And hopefully, getting rid of all that tissue that would have that Western X phytoplasma in there, try to get that all completely out before we replant it.
The problem at the moment is that any replanting that goes on now, given the amount of disease that's out in the field and the presence of the vectors, those new plantings are almost certainly going to get reinfected within a year or 2 years because of all the pathogen that's around them. So until we have a community-based approach to try and reduce the amount of pathogen out there, we're going to see a lot of losses. Some operations may see 50 or 100% losses. I know blocks that they had 10 to 20% infection last year. They removed that portion of the block. Now the rest of it's infected. So they're probably going to lose the entire thing.
We collected a lot of samples that had X disease, and so that kind of made us raise a bit of an alarm to the point where we wanted to go back and look into it a little bit more, especially when working with growers and field representatives that indicated that it might be more prominent than some people were thinking at the time.
What do you think happened when we had this cherry disease back in the 40s, 50s, and then it sort of went away and then it came back? What happened? Did we get lax as an industry? Did farmers just sort of say, man, it's not here, so, you know?
I don't think we know. I mean, what happened between the 40s to 50s into today? I don't think we really know. You could couple that with what happened after the population explosion that they had in California in the 80s and Canada in the 80s. What happened after that? We don't know. The one thing that we do know is that there's been a tremendous lack of research in between those infection periods to take and continue the research moving forward to trying to figure out how do we isolate and how do we take and try to find a preventative cure or a better way of early detection. Since the outbreak in California in the early to mid 80s, there's been virtually, once they've got things boxed into a corner where they're able to continue to farm, essentially the research stopped at that juncture and it hasn't continued. So we're so far behind in where we should be collectively as an industry on the research and technology that we need to take and deal with these three diseases. It's amazing that we've allowed ourselves to get to where we are.
What's the most common way for this disease to transfer itself to another plant?
So the most common way, and the two ways it can, is through root grafting. And we're going to see an example that shows that really well, but I kind of can see one that's might be happening here. So root grafting is one, and then with Western X, it's also leafhopper. And there are certain species that are more abundant and more common that WSU has found to carry the virus and can be a vector. So basically what the leafhopper does is it sucks and pierces on a tree that's infected, like this one, and then after a certain time period, it's guessed to be estimated from 2 to 4 weeks, then that adult leafhopper that's mobile affects another tree in the orchard that the leafhopper is carrying the virus, which makes it a vector.
So last year, one of the fellow growers that I share information with was seeing it on the Conowalk Pass lumbar loop area, and it was quite a devastating thing. It was probably about 30% to 40% of his trees he was removing, and that's when it really brought notice to my attention that we better be starting to look in our orchards pretty aggressively and making sure that we are not getting behind on scouting.
These last two, and I'm going to call the Little Cherry 1 and 2 just Little Cherry, and I'll call Western X Western X. I've actually been more worried about Little Cherry. We've got orchards that are surrounded by grapes, especially our south operation. Wine grapes all around it. And I had one wine grape right up next to it, one wine grape vineyard that was not farmed. It was organic and not farmed. And so we've been on a mealy bug for 5 or 7 years, and we've sprayed, we've taken care of mealy bug for quite a while. Different story with Western X. I mean, Western X, it's just been the last couple years that our antennas have went up on it. And we did start spraying, but not to the extent that we're going to be now and what the industry needs to be doing.
I think more than anything, we've taken reactive steps because we've seen it. Last year, we just cut them down soon after harvest. And this year, we cut them down and we sprayed to try to kill leafhoppers as we right before we cut them down. So any leafhoppers that were on that tree would be hopefully killed. And we're certainly thinking about proactive steps at this point, you know, making sure that we're mowing, getting rid of some of the weeds that might be hosts for those. You know, at times we thought about planting different species in our drive rows to help our biology for our soils, and now we're thinking that maybe we should be spraying out all those. Yeah, it's a hard one to figure out because, you know, I'd like to see that biological diversity, but at the same time, if they're hosts for leafhoppers, maybe it's a bad idea.
Hi, I'm Holly Boob, and I'm a tree fruit and wine grape consultant with GS Long. I've been involved in agriculture most of my life. Been with GS Long for 13 years now. John?
So, I'm John Byers. I farm here in the Dalles, Oregon, and the family started farming in 1970 and worked into the business all the way and been here since then. We've been dealing with Little Cherry for the 50 years I've known it, and maybe not quite that many, but it's been here forever, and we just dealt with it. If it became too big of a problem, we took the chainsaw out and cut it down. Otherwise, we picked around it or cut one limb off, and it seemed to control it pretty well. So we've dealt with that for years. It's been kind of more of an explosion here in the last probably 8 years. So now we're dealing with it, trying to figure out how to handle it. It was kind of really brought out last year with researchers coming and doing testing, and that we found out that we do have it, and now it's trying to figure out how economically damaging it is to us, and then also what can we do to control it.
So, like John mentioned, you know, right now there are a lot of unknowns. We've asked researchers and industry leaders to supply us information on leafhoppers as far as where our trap thresholds are for leafhoppers, and you know, when do we need to treat. And there is no definite answer right now based on lack of experience. So, you know, we're doing the best we can.
It's the way these insects transmit is such that you can spray whatever you want to spray. They will often transmit the disease or the pathogens that cause the disease. Then they'll die from whatever you've sprayed if they're coming in from the outside. So it's really not going to matter what you're spraying in your field. You're going to be faced with the same disease pressure. Research is an expensive occupation. We ask additional resources and support is always helpful. But also we're asking for the patience of the industry. I know it's immediate concern, but research does not move that fast. So to some extent, long term we're always playing catch up. So we both have to deal with immediate and the future. Worst case scenario, it's wipeout and a decade or so without a cherry industry, or a significant one.